Yeah.
Caps, this one? Oh, this one. Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, there we go. Tristan is a local breeder in the Midwest area. He's got some really, really cool fish. I've benefited from living nearby and being able to get some of his really cool stuff. His fish are outstanding. He gets in some really rare stuff that I very rarely ever see. Like I said, I benefit from it because I don't see this in some of the places I've lived in the past. So I'm very excited to have you guys listen to his talks and see some of the really cool stuff that he's getting. But Tristan?
Thank you so much, Balin. And thank you so much to Caps for having me. This is fun to get to do. I was thrilled when Balin asked me to speak a few months ago. I enjoy giving presentations, and this is kind of a new one for me, focusing more on nano fish and how I manage the Midwestern greenhouse with tropical fish, which is something that's relatively unusual. So I'm going to start the presentation by kind of giving you a background on myself, what my experience is in the hobby, how I got into the hobby, my education, and then I'm going to dive into my greenhouse itself and how I manage temperature in both the summer and the winter times, which are a real challenge in Wisconsin. I mean, you get some really, as you know, in Chicago, you get some really extreme weather any time of the year, but the winters and summers can be really, really tough. And from there, I'm going to talk about some of my techniques I use for breeding various nano fish and a few other fish too. And I'm happy to go into more detail later on a specific fish if anybody has questions. And if throughout the talk you have any questions you want to stop me, feel free to stop me. I'm happy to answer questions along the way too. So about me, I grew up in a small town. It's about 2 hours north of here called Evansville, Wisconsin, and that's where my business is now. I got a lot of experience when I was younger, dip netting and identifying fish in Quincy, Illinois. My grandma lived there. She had a farm with a creek that ran through it. So I really enjoyed going through dip netting various species and identifying them. And that's where I found a love for all wildlife, not just fish. I love to collect insects, frogs, toads. Every summer I'd keep a toad in like a big outdoor enclosure at home, which was super fun, and feed it fireflies, which that was really enjoyable for me too. It taught me a lot about caring for animals. So my introduction to fish keeping started when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. My dad is also a big aquarium hobbyist, and we started with one planted aquarium. I think it was a 40 or 50 gallon tank. And the first fish I remember keeping was a ram cichlid that I named Mr. Friendly, which was kind of ironic because he wasn't very nice. And I do remember being devastated when Mr. Friendly died, maybe after about 6 months of having him. But fortunately, the rams, especially back then, didn't live too long. And my dad and I together, once he saw I was interested in the hobby, we kind of ran with it, and eventually we had maybe a 20 to 30 tank fish room. So we did various breeding projects together. So we did some marine fish. These are bait-guide cardinal fish. This is a kind of old video. It's a little grainy. You can see the young bait-guide cardinal fish hanging in the sea urchin, which is really, really cool to see. A really fun fish to breed. And then about the cutest little baby fish that you could possibly find. Which is, for those of you that aren't familiar with bait-guide cardinal fish, they're paternal mouth breeders. And the male will hold the eggs for about 30 days and spit out juveniles that look just like this. So really neat fish. So another fish we worked with, this was a threadfin cardinal fish. Oh, did I lose it again? Threadfin cardinal fish. This is actually an article my dad wrote for Coral Magazine about raising these. And we had luck with these. A little bit more challenging than the bait-guide cardinal fish, since they do have pelagic larvae. They are mouth brooders, but they don't hold them for as long as the bait-guide cardinal fish do. So these raise the threadfin cardinal fish. When I was in high school, I did do some breeding with clownfish. Just for the fun of it, it was really, really fun. You get to see the fry go through the larvae, go through metamorphosis and turn into these little tiny clownfish. So you can see them there. Really cute little fish. So it was a lot of fun. And I didn't do just saltwater. We did freshwater too, of course, since that's what my business is now, is all freshwater. This is a discus pair. You can see guarding eggs that we we raised quite a few different discus, but this was one of the pairs we had. I also did some fancy guppies. I entered them in a few competitions when I was in high school. I kept a blue Moscow strain for 7 or 8 years, and that's the top photo. And I also did a red albino strain on the bottom. So my education, I got my degree in biology from UW Stevens Point. For those of you that know John Butkus, he also went to UW Stevens Point. and I actually met John there. He was a year ahead of me, and we were both involved in the live fish lab and the ichthyology club that's in Stevens Point. It has kind of a mouthful of a name, but you can see it, the IAASSSP. It's the Ichthyology and Aquarium Science Society of Stevens Point. I didn't come up with a name; it was kind of long, but it's definitely a mouthful. But it was a great experience for me to learn how to manage a little bit larger fish room. We had maybe a 50 tank fish room on campus, where we kept a number of different fish. We had a lot of tank busters, unfortunately. We had a lot of huge fish that were there before I got there, which I didn't love. As you know, I'm more into the nano fish and smaller fish, but I was able to bring some of those in my time there too. And also while in Stevens Point, I was able to get a minor in aquaculture and fish culture, as well as a certificate in aquaponics. Those were great programs offered by UW Stevens Point. They're one of the only universities in the nation that offered those programs. Unfortunately, since I've been there, they've removed those programs. So it's hard for me to plug the university so much anymore. I'm not sure why they did that. They were known for that. People would go there for those programs, but it's just unfortunate. But they do still have the ichthyology club, and you can see the long name up there. And I go back there once a year to give a talk to the club and kind of tell them about my experience owning an aquarium store. You can see on the bottom is a photo of me with some of the club members at one of the recent times I went there. And I actually just went there last week to give a presentation. And I did kind of a shorter version of the presentation I'm going to do today, since I figured college students wouldn't want a 45-minute to hour-long presentation on different species of fish. I shortened it just a little bit. Was there a question? Sorry. No? Okay. And then my work experience. So for those of you who know Ted Judy, I worked for Ted when I was in late in high school and early in college, when Ted had his business on Ted's Fish Room. This is a fantastic experience for me and really eye-opening. I really didn't know about most of these species of fish that Ted had, and Ted would only talk in scientific names, so I really had to learn Latin pretty quickly, which was confusing to me when I really didn't know anything. He'd say, well, do a water change on the loricarids. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. But now of course, that's a great way to learn the species, kind of trial by fire that way. But I developed a love for dwarf cichlids working for Ted. That's kind of what's his specialty. In this video on the bottom left, you can see that's a paired public Chromis cubensis malili guarding fry. Really neat dwarf cichlid. Some of the best parents that you're going to find in the aquarium hobby. Really neat fish and really productive too. You can see there's maybe 100, 125 fry. Really neat fish. And then that brings me kind of to where I am now. This is an older, I unfortunately don't have a more recent drone shot of my greenhouse. This is about a year into having the greenhouse. And you can see, actually, if you see where the blue car is on the right, since this photo has been taken, we built a second building, which serves as my retail store, which is not a greenhouse. It's just kind of a normal building. And that allows me to have walk-in hours and open hours for people to come in and buy fish from me. As the greenhouse, as you'll see in more photos, really isn't suitable for walking around in or for having retail customers come inside. So this is, oh shoot, I must be bumping something, but I'm not sure. All right. So these are some photos of when I first toured the greenhouse. So during my senior year of college, a local business landlord, actually, or businessman, approached me saying they had this greenhouse they thought would work great for a tropical fish hatchery. And I was kind of very doubtful, actually. And he took me there when I was on my Christmas break from school. And these are some photos on the left of the first day that he brought me in there to show me this greenhouse. And it looked pretty rough. He was using this for hydroponics for about 7 years, and it had been sitting empty for about 7 years after that. He has a lot going on, just kind of let the hydroponics go. But you could see there were some really nice features of the greenhouse that made it seem like it was something I could actually utilize. And one of the really neat things was when he brought me in there in January, and it was maybe 10 degrees outside, but in the greenhouse it was about 70 degrees with the sun out. And that was encouraging to see. I can't imagine having to heat that greenhouse every single day, even if the sun was out. So here's kind of some photos that we had to redo a lot of the greenhouse, the interior. We added more lime onto the bottom of it to level it out so we could put stands and not have everything off balance. And then added fresh paper down as well to make it look a little bit neater. And then there's just some more photos of during the constructing stands. And then on the bottom left, you can see a little more updated version with my cat standing there of what the greenhouse looks like now. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Ben. So those are just more updated photos of what the greenhouse looks like now. There's probably about 250. Maybe it's the computer. I don't know. Oh, it was. Okay. Well, no big deal. If there's some little interruptions, it just adds suspense, right? So, what's going to be next? Okay, now it's not switching. Let's see if I click it, if that works. It's changing on the on the small side of the screen, but it's not changing on the. See, yeah, I can see it's changing. It's not. Was it working? Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. I'll try not to touch anything. Okay. All right. So what people are always curious about is how do I keep the temperature at a level that I can keep tropical fish year-round in a greenhouse. So I'm going to go through some of the different modifications I've made and some of the essential features of the greenhouse that allow me to keep the temperature at nothing less than about 74, 75 degrees year-round. So in terms of heaters, I have 2 large natural gas heaters on both the east and the west side of the greenhouse. They're pretty effective at keeping it warm enough, albeit it's quite expensive in the wintertime, especially January, February. It's very, very expensive to heat the greenhouse. Even with all the things I'll show you later of what we've done to insulate it, it's still very, very expensive. So that's a huge drawback to having the greenhouse. And if people ask me all the time if I build more greenhouses, I would use a building. But there's definitely benefits of the greenhouse, and I like having just one. I can't imagine having more than one greenhouse to try to manage. So one of the first things we did, if you remember in the previous photos, the greenhouse had polycarbonate walls, and those were really inefficient for keeping the heat inside the greenhouse. So after about a year of being in the greenhouse, we added 2 inches of insulation on either side of that polycarbonate, and as well as put that tin siding on the inside and the outside. And that has been really effective, at least maintaining some of the heat in the greenhouse. There's unfortunately only so much you can do to minimize the escape of heat through the plastic, but this does help. One of the biggest and best function or portions of the greenhouse and features of the greenhouse is these retractable curtains. This is a photo I took. It takes it about a minute to open and close, but you can see it allows a lot of light into the greenhouse and also rejects a lot of light from coming into the greenhouse. So in the summertime, I keep these closed almost all the time. I open them early in the morning and then kind of in the evening. If I was to open these during the daytime hours on a sunny summer day that's 80 degrees, it would easily get to be 120, 125 degrees in the greenhouse. But by closing these curtains and with some other features like an evaporative cooler that I'll show in a little bit, that allows me to keep it at least at 95, maybe 100 degrees at the most, which isn't as big of a deal for the fish as it is for the people who have to work in the greenhouse, or as me, I guess. But it's not the end of the world. As long as it's not above 100 degrees, it's all right. And if it does get that warm, it isn't for very long, maybe 2 or 3 hours. And these curtains are also huge in the wintertime because, okay, lost it again. Shoot. Stand on 1 foot. Oh, stop there. Well, oh. All right, still there. Okay, I'll just keep going. All right. So the curtains in the wintertime are super important because I keep them open at least during sunny days up until about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I basically don't have to run the heaters at all on a sunny day. Even if it's 10 degrees outside, the sun heats it up to about 80 degrees at a minimum. And if it's even a day like today, 30 degrees, it can get to be 85 degrees in the greenhouse just with the sunlight, which is really nice. You don't have to run the heaters, and it does lessen that expense on me a little bit. Another interesting feature of the greenhouse, and this is something that we added after moving into it, is this air insulation. So there's actually 2 layers of plastic on the greenhouse, and on both the east and the west side near the heaters, we have these fans that puff up the barrier in between the 2 layers of plastic. It creates about an 8 to 10 inch barrier of air, which is really nice. It adds just a little bit more insulation, a little less heat is escaping from the greenhouse. And it's also essential for if you get a windstorm, that plastic, when there's just the one layer, it really shakes and it really seems like it could fall off. By having that more tight insulation, that blown up air barrier, it keeps the greenhouse a lot more stable and can also deflect small debris like sticks, twigs, that sort of thing. It can deflect that. We did have a hailstorm come through with a baseball, softball size hail last spring, and it didn't deflect that, unfortunately. It went through both layers of the plastic, but luckily it wasn't, the bulk of the storm did not hit my shop, so the plastic was ruined, but nothing inside the greenhouse was ruined. So that was huge. And if I probably just had one layer of plastic, the hailstones would have gone through and shattered tanks, almost definitely.
You got that pond next to your
greenhouse?
You thought about doing like geothermal where you're pumping in cool?
I've thought about that. Yeah. For now, it's just the cost of doing that, I suppose, to set it up. That is something I'd love to do in the future, but for now, it's just not in the cards. A few other things we've done to kind of mitigate the temperature swings in the greenhouse. We've added some interior plastic, which you can kind of see goes up above the tanks. You can see the tanks are down here. It goes up above the tanks and just kind of funnels the heat down from the heaters. We're finding that the heaters, some of that heat that was blown out by those big blowers would just go straight up and escape the greenhouse immediately. So by adding this lower layer of plastic, it kind of funnels the heat down to the tanks, and it keeps some of the tanks quite warm. The tanks that are close to the heaters are usually around 80, 82 degrees. And then farther away, they're more in the 75, 76 degree range. So that's something I have to do when I place fish in the greenhouse, is decide which part of the greenhouse would be best for these fish. Like ram, cichlids, discus, I obviously heat those tanks too, but I keep those in the front portion of the greenhouse closer to the heaters where they'll stay a little bit warmer. And things like rainbow shiners, which I brought a few of today, I keep on the lower levels in the back end of the greenhouse where it stays a little bit cooler. And then we also added an exterior shade cloth, which has been huge in the summertime. I put this on usually near the end of April and take it off in maybe mid to late October. This really helps keep the temperature a little bit cooler in the greenhouse. Again, before I added this, it could easily get over 100 degrees in a hurry. And this is just a really simple thing to do, and it makes a huge difference on the temperature of the greenhouse. And it's also another barrier for deflecting debris, sticks. And this wasn't on the greenhouse when the hailstorm went through. So I don't know if the hail would have gone through the plastic if that was there. I was just a few days away from putting that on when that came through. So it was just bad timing on my part. But you never know what's going to happen with weather. In terms of keeping the greenhouse cool, on both opposite ends of the east and the west side of the greenhouse, we have these large fans, and they pull air from the back of the greenhouse through the greenhouse and are really effective at keeping the temperature at least manageable, alongside an evaporative cooler, which you can see right here. And this is from the outside of the greenhouse looking in, and that's just when we were kind of working on some of the panels were taken out. But I don't know how many of you are familiar with their evaporative coolers or swamp coolers. Essentially, the water runs through these top pipes here, trickles down, and then as they evaporate on these manifolds, the fans pull that cool air through the greenhouse. And it's really quite effective, although if it's a really humid day, it doesn't work as well. But I found that it lowers the temperature about 10 degrees max, which is huge. If it lowers it from 105 to 95, that's great for me. That's fantastic. And you can also see in this back portion of the greenhouse, I didn't really talk about this, we grow orchids. So I have the back quarter of the greenhouse kind of cordoned off with plastic sheeting where we grow Oncidium orchids. So that keeps it a little bit cooler and a little bit more humid for those orchids. And I'm not wasting maybe quite as much heat trying to heat the entire greenhouse year round. This only shows a portion of the orchids. We probably have 500 or 600 orchids in the back quarter of the greenhouse. And that's kind of what I talk about here as well. Some of the benefits of having the greenhouse, the natural lighting, which is great, but can be a challenge in terms of algae grows very, very quickly, and it can get very, very hot. We do grow orchids and utilize some of the fish wastewater for watering the orchids, just depending on the species of orchid. I don't have to heat most of the tanks, although warmer water fish, certainly rams, angelfish, discus, all those tanks are heated. It is very easy to make green water, which is a good and a bad thing. I always have access to green water, although sometimes it occurs when I'm not really wanting it to be around. It is a fun work environment for the most part. Some of those really hot days aren't so much fun, but in the wintertime to go into a room that's 80 degrees when it's 10 degrees outside is fantastic. It's really wonderful. It boosts your mood for sure, and you get that natural light going through the greenhouse too, which is great during the shorter months in the winter. And I do get some natural pest control. I have a toad that lives in the greenhouse, and you can see I'm holding him there, and he's chirping at me. He lives there year round. I see him. I don't see him all that often. I see signs of him very often. I find his poops around the greenhouse, but that's just part of having a toad in there. I don't know how he showed up. He just one day appeared and he hasn't left. My sister-in-law named him Harold, so that's Harold. Not sure how she came up with that name, but it seems to fit him. And it's a fun little thing to have in the greenhouse. Some of the disadvantages, again, the sunlight, it can be very excessive. It can get very, very hot and get a lot of algae. And it is get very cold in the winter time at night. So you can see this bottom photo is actually the first winter I had the greenhouse. At the time, I only had the one heater, the one natural gas heater, and it got to be, I think, -50 a couple nights. And I was really sweating it. I thought I might lose everything just because I didn't know if those heaters would be able to keep things warm enough in there to keep the fish alive. And I did some crazy last minute modifications. I added more plastic. I tried to close off as many gaps as I could. And luckily, with just the one heater, did stay warm enough, and I didn't lose any fish. But that was kind of crazy, and you could see the snow piled up, which was actually kind of a benefit. Added a little bit of insulation onto the sides. But that's how bad the winds were, too, at that time, that they're blowing the snow up like that. It is tough to work at night. I mainly rely on sunlight to work in the greenhouse. So at night, I do have some lights, but not every single tank is lit. And these are just kind of some photos of, I do grow like some philodendron out the backs of some of the tanks, do some spider plants and that sort of thing. This is that's my beta grow out tub. So once I have baby beta splendens that get to about half an inch, I throw them in there, which is really fun. You get 50, 100, 200 betas swimming around the tank in the tub, and it's really quite cool. And this is just a sunset outside the greenhouse. This is that pond that's right next to it. It's a fun place to work because the pond is stocked, so I can fish for largemouth bass right outside of the greenhouse, which is really quite cool. And it's a private pond, so I have pretty unlimited access to it, and there's not many people that fish it. So I'm going to get into the fish portion of the talk, and one thing that I definitely specialize in my business is nano fish. This is just kind of a display in my store with some various different nano fish, some cories, some pandagara, some betas, some dwarf rainbow fish. And I do really love nano fish. That's kind of one of my prides and joys is having a good selection of nano fish for my customers. And then why nano fish? Why do I like nano fish? They're almost always planet tank friendly, which is great for a plant club. I think there's a wide range of behavior, some really fascinating behavior, depending on the type of nano fish that you're talking about. And there's such a huge diversity. There's so many different kinds you can keep. I've just put a few here, and I know apistos could be considered borderline nano fish. It depends on the tank, but they are a small fish, and they can do well in up to a 15-gallon tank. This is a dwarf pencilfish right here, another great nano fish. This is Nanostomus mortenthaleri, Chili rasbora, and I do keep and breed some pygmy sunfish too. This is Elosoma gilberti right here. Fantastic nano fish. They only get about an inch Really, really neat fish. And when the males dance, it's one of the coolest things you're ever going to see. They do get colored up like this, and it's almost like a fluorescent or iridescent color. So nanofish by definition, there's many different, you go online, there's a lot of different definitions of what a nanofish is. In my mind, a nanofish is a smaller fish that can thrive in a 20-gallon tank or less. So an apisto, I would say, falls into that category. It can't be with all nanofish, like chili reservoirs may not be the best tank mates, but you can create a nano tank system with an apisto pair, some corridors, some dwarf pencilfish. And betas too, I love keeping male betas in community setups. You just have to be selective on the fish that you keep them with, but they can actually thrive in a community setup versus being on their own. They seem much happier in a tank with some other fish around them. So I'm going to go into some of the different fish that I keep and breed. This is Apistogrammas, of course, and on the left, this is a female Apistogramma epicaxis guarding fry, and on the right is a tank strain Apistogramma agassizi that I raised. There's such a huge diversity of apistos. I don't know how many of you have kept them, but there's tons of different colors, tons of different morphs. I actually prefer the wild strains over the tank strains, like this one on the right is beautiful, but I do prefer the wild type fish more. And what does make this fish special is I actually crossed him with a wild. He came from an F1 cross of a wild agassizi and a tank strain agassizi. So he has this phenomenal finnage, but he also has some phenomenal colors that come with some of the tank strain species. In terms of breeding apistos, I like to use 10 to 15 gallon aquariums, sometimes 20 gallon longs if it's a larger species, like some of the larger like barlow species get a little bit bigger and they benefit from a 20 gallon long. I like to add multiple caves into the tanks. You can buy specific apistogramma huts or caves. I like to just take terracotta pots and split them in half and stick them into the sand. And that's a really effective and cheap way to create caves for apistos. In terms of botanicals, it depends on the species I'm keeping. The tank strain apistos, they don't need them as much to spawn. They're going to spawn in harder, more basic water than the wild species that need the acidic and low hardness water. But if I am going to use botanicals, I've used a bunch of different ones, the oak, catappa, Indian almond, and magnolia leaves. Honestly, one of my favorites is the magnolia leaf. I feel like it takes a little bit longer to break down than the others. Indian almond leaves break down really, really fast and create a lot of mess in the tank. In terms of temperature, I don't really heat any of my apisto breeding tanks in my greenhouse. I put the apisto breeders on the higher portion of the rack, so they're going to stay at about 75 to 79 degrees year round. In the summertime, they might get a little warmer on those hot days. They might get in the low 80s. That's not really where I want them to be at long term. In the mid to upper 70s is ideal. I like to do pairs, not so much trios. I found that there can be a lot of aggression in trios. The subdominant female often ends up getting kicked out by the pair, and you end up having to remove her anyways, or she ends up getting killed. So pairs are definitely ideal. I use, for almost all my tanks, I use air-driven sponge filters. I have 2 linear piston pumps that run all the air in my greenhouse. It's maybe about 250, 300 lines that it runs. And apistos prefer slower water movement. Sometimes people struggle with these because they put them in a tank with a lot of flow, and they don't appreciate that. They like much slower flow, much more gentler flow, and that you'll find them kind of in the portions of the tank where there's not much water being moved. If I do use plants, I like anubias or other slow-growing rhizome plants that don't need a lot of light. The apistos will spawn a lot better if they're in kind of a little bit darker tank with more subdued lighting versus a really bright tank. They're not going to be quite as happy, at least for spawning. Another dwarf cichlid that I breed quite a lot of is the ram cichlid. On the right here, you can see this is a pair of black rams with fry, and they can be quite productive, up to maybe 200, 250 fry at one time. They're notoriously bad parents. This was luckily a good pair. It just very much depends on the fish. You can do everything right, and they'll eat the babies. So I oftentimes will remove fry or eggs from the pair and hatch them out separately. But in terms of the setups I use for rams, I find that 10-gallon tanks work really, really well with just a really basic setup. I use silica sand. I buy it from Home Depot or Menards. I can't remember which. And it's like $5 for a 50-pound bag. It works really, really well. The rams like it because they are earth eaters. So they like to go through and sift through the sand. That's how they eat most of the time. And it looks nice too until the sand gets dirty. And I do use a little bit deeper bed of sand than I would for apistos because they like to build, or they like to dig into the sand and make little indentations in the sand, and they'll move their fry from pit to pit before they're free swimming. And these do need it warmer than apistos. 81 to 83 degrees is ideal. I know some people keep them a little bit warmer. I prefer more in the low 80s. So of course in the greenhouse I do heat all the ram tanks because I can't consistently keep tanks that warm. So there's some kerosins that I've had some success breeding as well. I'll kind of go through a few of the different techniques that I've used for breeding different species. And one of the coolest ones, I brought 2 trios of these to auction off at the end, is the Splash Tetra. This is Copella Arnoldi. I was lucky enough, Eddie from the GCCA actually sent me this video of a pair that I sent him. And I've always been trying to get videos of this, and I've never been patient enough to actually capture it. But it's the coolest thing for those who aren't familiar with Splash Tetras. In the wild, the male and the female can cover underneath an overhanging leaf, and they'll jump out of the water together. The male will land on top of the female, and they'll deposit a few eggs on the leaf, and they'll fertilize the eggs. And they'll do this maybe 10, 12 times until they've laid usually about 20 to 30 eggs. They don't lay a ton of eggs at one time, but they do spawn really frequently. And they call them Splash Tetras because the males have the huge caudal fin that they'll sit underneath the eggs and occasionally splash their tail to splash the eggs and keep the eggs moist. I'm just trying to make sure that doesn't happen again, which is a really, really neat thing to see in the aquarium. And I have made setups where I've taken like philodendron or something and hung it over a tank, and they have jumped up on the leaves and spawned. But they do actually seem to prefer just spawning on the glass or the lid of the tank. I assume that's because it's a little more stable than jumping on a leaf that's moving around and wiggling around. It's a little bit harder for them to actually successfully spawn that way. In terms of breeding these, it's really, really simple. I like to use like a 20-gallon a tank that's tall. If you have a different size tank that's tall, it works too. I lower the water level by maybe 4 or 5 inches. Make sure there's a really tight cover on the tank to keep it humid so that the eggs don't dry out. And they'll usually spawn in the morning. I've found between 9 and 11 o'clock in the morning is when they'll spawn. And that's part of the deal with the greenhouse is they're very in tune with the time of day. So they're very much on a cycle, and they'll spawn in the morning when the sun's just kind of first coming up and it's starting to get light in the greenhouse. And they do sometimes spawn on the lid, which is kind of bizarre. I don't know how they're able to do that, but they sometimes prefer that over the glass. But if they do spawn the glass, one of the coolest things is that you can actually see the embryos developing. They're super, super fast developing. Within 24 hours, you can take a flashlight if they're on the glass and actually look and see the little embryos swirling around the eggs. So it's really, really cool to see. And after 48 hours, they will hatch, and that's stimulated by the male splashing them. And then they'll fall into the tank, which at that point, if you don't have enough cover in the tank, they'll just get eaten. So that's kind of the issue with raising those. So if you want to actually grow a bunch of them out, what I like to do is go through at about 46 hours, or close to 48 hours with a razor blade and scrape them off the glass or the lid. And I put them in like a 1-gallon jar, the eggs in the 1-gallon jar, and I fill it with green water, which I have a lot of. And I leave them in there for about a week until they start eating some somewhat prepared foods. I like to use the Golden Pearls 50 micron larval diet. That works really, really well for a lot of small fish. And at that point, I'll move them to a 5 or 10-gallon tank for a longer period grow out. Another fish that I use a different technique for. Obviously, these have a very different spawning pattern. This is the Mussel Red Cherry Tetra. One of the prettiest tetras I think that you can find. They're almost like a natural glowfish to me. They stand out really, really nice in aquarium. The first time I saw these was, if any of you know Jeff Michaels at Aquatic Clarity, I was in his fish room and I saw these from across the room, and they just kind of blew my mind, to be perfectly honest. They're really, really stunning fish. Their colors can change throughout the day, but when they spawn, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a picture of them actually spawning because they get kind of flighty when they're in that process, but they're like almost a blood red, just incredible. They pop out like crazy. It's a really cool fish, and also a really pretty easy fish to keep, despite most of them being either wild caught or F1s in the hobby. So I have a group of wild caught Mussel Red Cherry Tetras, and I use a really, really simple setup for breeding these, and I've had great success with it. I just use a 10-gallon bare bottom tank that I take a big chunk of Java moss or subwassertang or a combination of both, and sink it to the bottom, kind of in the center. And I, of course, as with most tetras and other scarce spawning fish, I separate the males and the females for about a week before spawning to make sure the female gets really egg laden. And I like to just use pairs for these guys. I've had the best luck with pairs. I'll move the male and the female in the tank in the morning, and usually by the following afternoon, I take them out. You can see the female gets significantly thinner, and at which point they've laid quite a few eggs. And it is nice that you can go through and with the bare bottom tank and shake the Java moss or the subwater tank. And you'll see the eggs fall out. They're big enough that you can see them. And then they hatch within a couple days, and then it takes them about a week from there to start free swimming. And I've started these without using green wire, just using the Golden Pearls larval diet. This is a really great food. If any of you haven't used it, I would definitely recommend it. You can buy it at Bryan Shrimp Direct, and the 50 micron size is basically a powder, and they will eat that pretty early on, and it helps them get started and get them growing pretty quickly. And I usually just add a sponge filter into the tank once they start free swimming. Add a sponge filter with very slow aeration. If you add too much aeration, you're just going to kill them all because they are delicate swimmers. They can't swim very well, and they only have so much energy to use to swim around the tank. So if they're getting pushed around by a lot of flow, they're going to die, unfortunately. And green wire would work for these as well. I've never had to use it, and I can get 20 or 30 of these at a time, and when they don't lay a ton of eggs to begin with. Another even simpler species to keep, I use a slightly different approach for these guys, is ember tetras. These are a fantastic nano fish. They're really, really cool. They live a long time. They're beautiful. And honestly, they look like baby muzzle red cherry tetras. If you put a muzzle red cherry tetra when it's the size of an ember tetra side by side with an ember, they look identical. And embers, depending on the strain that you get, they can be really, really bright red. I've gotten some from the Czech Republic that are really stunning fish, and those are some of the nicer ones. You do see some of the imported ones that are a paler color, almost like a light gold or even whitish color. But embers I think are underrated fish, really easy. And to go along with the apistos, they're fantastic to other fish with apistos. They stay more in the upper portion of the tank. They're not going to bother them. So the technique that I use for these guys is in a smaller tank. I've actually tried them using the technique I used for the cherry tetras, but didn't quite work as well. I don't know if it was the size of the tank or what exactly the problem was, but they just didn't lay nearly as many eggs. So for this, I made this little kind of net system that sits inside the tank, and it goes down about halfway into the tank. I put a clump of Java moss, just like the other tetras, and I put just one pair of conditioned ember tetras in the tank and leave them in for about 2 to 3 days, at which point I take them out, and usually within a week, you'll start seeing 20, 30, 40 fries swimming around the tank. And it's really easy just to take a sponge filter, throw in the tank, and then you have immediate filtration. And this does work really well for other small tetras too. I've done neon tetras this way. Neon tetras work really, really well with this method. And what the interesting thing about neon tetras is that they spawn at midnight. So they have really like odd spawning time, but I put them in the evening, and the next morning the tank's full of eggs. So they have really, I don't know, they're in tune with the moon and the time. So that's kind of a cool thing about the neon tetras. Same thing with the other species. I like to just start them on the Golden Pearl 50 micron larval diet. You can use green water, but I haven't really had a need for that. Some scatter spawning cyprinids. I do breed a lot of these. On the left, of course, this is Celestial Pearl Danio. On the right, this is looks like white cloud minnow. It's actually the Vietnamese white cloud minnow. A little bit rarer species, a beautiful fish. They kind of get these lobed fins, slightly different fin patterns than the common white cloud minnows. So the system that I use for hatching and hatching CPDs is, I'm sure you've maybe seen some of these advertised online, and people have done similar things to this, is I create a really simple airlift system to collect eggs from the parents. These are 10-gallon tanks that I just made a little fry collecting system out of PVC. So I stuffed this kind of well with Java moss, and there's netting on the bottom so the parents can't get all the way through. And the CPDs, I put usually 2 males and 4 females in one of these tanks, and they spawn daily. So they'll go through daily into the Java moss and lay quite a few eggs. One of the issues with this is that the eggs are very adhesive. So I go through in the afternoons and take like a small stick and kind of swirl it around, and the eggs will fall through and get pumped up into this. These are just actually takeout containers. So it's a really simple, inexpensive thing that you can make just about anything. You can use all sorts of different things. And there's a little slit cut here with netting that allows the water to flow back out. And then once the fry are free swimming, I'll move them into a 5 or 10 gallon tank for longer term grow out. Some other nano fish, these are maybe not the best community fish, but these are some really neat nano fish, are the wild type betas. Of course, there's all different sizes and shapes of wild type betas, but there's some really neat nano wild type betas that work great in a small planet aquarium. This on the left is beta alba marginata, which is a mouth brooding beta. On the right, this is beta api api, which is a bubble nesting beta. So beta api api, this is a really fantastic fish. Not super difficult to breed, believe it or not. They spawn very similar to like the common beta, the beta splendens. I like to use a 10-gallon aquarium that I fill with quite a few botanicals, Indian almond leaves or magnolia leaves. I just float them on the top. I heat the tank to about 80 degrees. And the pairs, if they're conditioned well, will spawn quite readily. They'll spawn about every 2 weeks. They are bubble nesters, so the male will do all the fry care after they're done spawning. What's nice about these is they're not nearly as aggressive as beta splendens, so you can keep the male and the female in the same tank. You don't need to be worried about them killing each other. It is something to note that you might want to still keep a close eye on them. The fish are unpredictable. They can get aggressive with each other, but for the most part, I've found when they're done with spawning, the female will just completely ignore the male and vice versa, which is perfect. So this is an ideal situation. And at that point, I leave the pair in the tank until the fry start free swimming, which takes about 5 or 6 days. And you want to get the pair out pretty quickly because they will start eating the fry for whatever reason after they start swimming. Another fish that I've had some luck with is licorice grammies. This is probably one of my favorite fish, and I wish I just had more space to devote to these because they are almost all critically endangered, and they are overfished. And they're just a fantastic fish, like I talked about before, with really, really fascinating behavior. And they can be some of the prettiest fish you're ever going to see when the males get colored up. And the success I've had with breeding these is in 20-gallon long tanks. I prefer to use bare bottom. I found that licorice grammies are really, really sensitive to dissolved organics. So if you have too much waste, too much mulm in the tank, they might thrive. They might live and be somewhat happy, but they're never going to spawn. To stimulate spawning, I do daily 20% water changes with RO water to get them conditioned and get them interested in spawning. And it usually takes about a week of doing daily water changes, and then they'll spawn. The males, they'll sometimes produce a bubble nest. I've seen them lay eggs without doing any bubble nesting at all. The eggs are actually really, really adhesive, so they don't really need that bubble nest so much. I use just shards of terracotta pots with really, really tight clearance from the bottom of the glass to the top of the pot. They like those tight caves. If you have too big of a cave, they're never going to spawn. They need that really, really small space. They really enjoy having that smaller space to go in and spawn. For whatever reason, they just don't like the larger caves. The fry, you can leave the pair together. They won't get aggressive with each other, but once the fry are free swimming, you'll want to remove the parents. And the male does do all fry care prior to free swimming. Another fish, I brought some of these today with me. This is a rainbow shiner, a U.S. native fish. Really one of the most beautiful fish I think I've ever seen when they're in their spawning colors. And this is kind of where I utilize the different temperatures in the greenhouse. I keep these in the back portion of the greenhouse in low 20 long tanks where it stays cooler. And especially in the summertime, I can't put these in one of my higher tanks where it might get 82, 83 degrees. They're not going to love that. They prefer more of the low 70s, high 60s is great for these guys. Although they will be fine in the upper 70s, although they won't spawn. I actually had a customer of mine gave me this really neat little egg collecting, fry collecting system. It has a false bottom. So what I do is I fill the top of it with kind of pea gravel, slightly larger gravel. I put a group of 8 to 10 rainbow shiners in a 20-gallon long with nothing else in the tank besides this. Because if you have too many different decorations in the tank, they might spawn all over and you'll have no hope in actually collecting any of the eggs. But with this, they'll lay almost all their eggs up above these little rocks. And this has a false bottom, so it's easy to check. You just pull this top part off and look inside, and you'll see the eggs, and they're actually quite big. They're fairly large eggs for being a smaller fish, and they'll lay a lot of them. You can get 100 or 200 in a day with a group like this, which is really nice considering it is a pretty desirable fish. And once I see the eggs, I'll pull them out and put them in usually a 5.5 gallon tank and put maybe 1 to 2 drops of methylene blue in the tank with pretty moderate to heavy aeration to keep the fungus off of the eggs. And then they'll hatch within a couple days and start free swimming in about 5 days after that, at which point they can take golden pearl larval diet. Green water works okay, but within a couple days they can start eating baby brine shrimp as well. And I brought, I think, a group of 5 and a group of 6 of these for anybody that wants to try them in the raffle later on. And I'm happy to answer any more questions about them too, if you'd like to know more about breeding them. And the other thing, the common misconception with these is that they're short-lived. I found them to not be short-lived at all. The first group that I brought in, I had them for I think 5-6 years, and they were adults when I received them. So they are fairly long-lived fish. It is a misconception that they only live a year or two. Some rainbow fish. I've recently kind of gotten into breeding different species of rainbow fish, mainly the larger species. I have started doing some of the dwarf rainbow fish, like the pseudomugil. I have a group of pseudomugil mellis I got from Marcel. For those of you that know Marcel, he has a really incredible fish room. I don't know if he's been here to talk, but he's got some really cool rainbow fish, and I've learned a lot from him on breeding rainbow fish. But I use 20-gallon longs for breeding most like Bosemani rainbow fish and the other larger rainbow fish species. And I go through maybe 3 to 4 times a week and pull eggs out of the mops. And I use this kind of interesting little system for hatching the rainbow fish eggs. I created this recirculating system. This is the only recirculating system I have in both of my buildings. I only have one system that's recirculating, and this is the one. I don't really like using recirculating systems because there's a huge risk of disease spreading throughout the whole system. If you get ick in one tank, it's going to spread all over the place. But I do, basically this system is these little kind of shoe boxes. Basically, this is a really cheap thing to make, and water is pumped into these where it drains out on this end, and then it drains down to a sump below here that actually has a UV sterilizer on it too, to keep a large bacterial growth from happening in the system. But I'll just pull the eggs out and put them in these little individual containers, and they'll hatch out right here. It's super simple. And once I have 50, 75 fry in one of those, I'll move them into a larger tank for longer term grow out. And while not a fish, another animal that I've had some success with breeding is the Amano shrimp. And I'm sure many of you know that these have the amphidromous life cycle. So the females in the wild will release the eggs in pure fresh water, where they'll get swept out into the ocean, into brackish to salt water. And the larvae will develop for about 30 days in the ocean, at which point they'll go through metamorphosis and they'll crawl back into the stream. So the way that I raise these is I find a buried female. Once I see a buried Amano shrimp female, I move her into a 1-gallon jar with just light aeration and wait to start seeing the larvae swimming around the tank. Or I wouldn't even call it swimming. They kind of drift around the tank. They don't move a lot. They kind of look like they're dead. The larvae look they're kind of curved like this. They look really strange. But once I see those, I move them into a 5 to 10-gallon tank. 5-gallon tanks work quite well, actually, if you don't have a huge spawn of them. And then I slowly transition the water to salt water with a specific gravity of about 1.018. So not like reef tank specific gravity, but still definitely salt water. And then one of the critical things for growing these is having the marine microalgae to feed them. They can't be fed, obviously, freshwater green water because they'll just die and foul the tank. I use Nanochloropsis marine algae to feed them. And you need to make sure the tank is really dark green to the point that you can't even see the larvae in the tank. If you don't have it green enough, they're just going to waste away and die, unfortunately. And they stay in the larval form for about 30 days. And you know they're close to settling, and they almost turn like a bright red color. It's kind of bizarre. They turn bright red. And then a few days after that, you'll see all these basically little tiny Amano shrimp that are maybe a couple millimeters long zooming around the tank. At that point, you can start slowly transitioning them back into fresh water, which I usually take about a week to really slowly move them from that salt water back into fresh water. And some of the other breeding projects, I do enjoy breeding other fish other than nano fish. I do some beta splendens. You can see a gorgeous male beta in the top right video. And I do some larger cichlids too. This is a pair of Pyros librifera, the mouth breeding setter. On the bottom, you can actually see the male there spitting out a group of fry. Really cool thing to see. It took me a long time to get that video because they're so protective of the fry. Usually as soon as I'd put my hand up to take the video, they'd suck them all back up. What's I really like about this specific type of mouth brooding fish is that they co-parent. So they both will mouth brood. It's not maternal or paternal. They'll both take turns, and sometimes they'll both take half of the spawn, and they'll each have some in their mouths.
What size are those adults?
They're about like this. This pair was actually wild collected by Ted Judy back in 2016 or so. So they were that big when he got them. I still have them. So I don't know how old they are. They might be 15, 20 years old. But really, really a neat fish. Obviously not a nano fish, but a really, really neat fish nonetheless. And I do, of course, still do West African cichlids, like the Nomalochromis thomasi. I think I've brought some of those to some members of the club before, the African butterfly cichlid. Definitely not a nano fish, really mean little fish, but gorgeous. So that kind of negates the aggressiveness a little bit for him. I do some plecos as well, as I'll show in the next slide. I am working with zebra plecos. I have a group of zebra plecos. Some other mouth brooding betas. This is beta chinoides on the top left. Really beautiful little beta, great nano fish. And on the right side is a pair of beta macrostoma. You can see the female actually transferring eggs into the male's mouth. They don't always seem to do this. I've seen them do it from time to time. It's kind of bizarre. I'm not sure why they take that extra step for the female to pick up the eggs. I don't know if the male missed some and she's making sure he got them all. But really neat fish. Certainly not a nano fish. They get quite big, maybe 5-6 inches max. But a really, really stunning fish. Neat fish to get to keep. And some other fish I'm just kind of playing around with, some rare gobies. This is a Muculagobius species. This is them hatching. They're really prolific, unfortunately, really, really tiny fry. And I haven't had any luck yet actually rearing the fry for more than a week or so. But neat fish nonetheless, and a fun breeding project for me. I always enjoy a challenge, especially when the slide cuts out. And finally, I just want to take a brief moment to talk about my shop. So from the first photo I showed, this building has been built since then. We put this kind of neat cordwood wall in the front, which makes it unique. These are just kind of some photos of the interior when we were designing and building this. I think I have maybe about 80 aquariums in here. And this is where I have open retail hours, Thursdays through Sundays. And actually, since this photo was taken, we've added a second cement pad right here where we'll be doubling the size of the store. And I'm hoping to start working on that in April, later this spring. So that should allow me to have a lot more room to bring in a lot more interesting species. With the size of the shop I have now, unfortunately, I can't even move all the neat fish I have in the greenhouse into the shop because there's just not enough tanks in there. So I need the extra space, and it does get quite claustrophobic when there's a lot of customers there too. So I'm excited to be adding more into it, and I can do more species of fish. It'll be mostly more nano fish, although I am hoping to have some wild discus tanks in there as well. I'm hoping to be getting some Heckle discus really soon. It's a dream fish for me. So just a few more photos. This is what the inside of the shop looks like now, with the update with all the tanks set up and all the plants. And that's the shop cat that comes with me too. He's very popular in my business. A lot of little kids love him, so it's fun to get to bring him out there too. And then that's my last slide. So I appreciate you inviting me here, and if you have any questions, feel free to.
Do you have any schedule with breeding of when the fish spawn? They spawn, it'd be like you're by yourself, pretty much. You're setting up tetras 1 week, betas the next week.
I do, yeah, I do, yeah. I only do I do like breeding beta splendens, but I only do it about once a year because you get 100 of them, and that's plenty. So I'd love to breed them more, but I know I'd just end up with way too many betas. Yeah.
Have you ever bred any of the Dichrosis, like the Phomatosis?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Any tips or things that you can remember that work?
The eggs are really, really delicate. The best luck I had actually raising them was removing the eggs from the parents and hatching them in a 2.5 gallon tank, heated at about 80 degrees. And I use a little bit of methylene blue to as an antifungal, usually about 2 drops. But otherwise, they need really low pH, below 6, 5.5. But they do lay a lot of eggs, so you get a lot to work with. So, yep.
Have you ever with a chili raspberry spawning at all?
I'd like to try that. Yeah, I haven't tried that yet. It's definitely something I'd like to do though, because those are hard to get in healthy. That's part of the problem with those. So, yep.
How long do you like to transition your amanas from salt to fresh and fresh to salt?
The fresh to salt is usually about 3 or 4 days. The salt to fresh is about a week. Yeah.
So which killifish were you working with?
I do like the Epiplates genus more so. I don't do a lot with the annuals. More of the non-annual killifish.
And where are you located?
And just south of Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh.
It's only about an hour 45 from here. Yeah. It's really not too far. It's a very easy drive. Just straight up on the interstate till you get to Janesville. And you get off there, and it's about 20 minutes from Janesville. Yeah, it does seem that way. Yeah, Beloit and Rockford, yeah, are all about 20 minutes. Yeah.
How about water chemistry, pH management? You do buffering, you treat your water?
I do, yep. So I use RO water for everything. I'm on a private well that has really high nitrates and really high phosphorus. So it's really pretty much unusable water. I like to use CChem Equilibrium and the CChem Alkaline Buffer to buffer and add GH and KH back into the water. I have one barrel that I use for mixing up, and I keep one barrel just straight RO for fish that just need straight RO, like licorice gouramis, zebra plecos, wild betas, that sort of thing.
So you're surrounded by agriculture.
Yes. Yep. So there's a hobby farm right next to my shop with some cattle, some pigs, chickens. People always think that that's all my farm, but there's no way I could handle taking care of any more livestock than what I have. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
I don't know if you mentioned this. Do you find there any like advantage to breeding fish in a greenhouse specifically versus like in a building or something?
The advantage is definitely in the spring and summertime. They're more in tune with the weather. You can predict when they're going to spawn. It's a lot easier, and they show more of their, I think, natural behaviors since they're getting natural sunlight. They have natural day lengths. So in the summertime, they get very prolific. In the wintertime is the issue when there's not as much light, and they're just not going to spawn as much, and they're going to slow down a little bit, which is okay because usually by that point I have tons of baby fish that I'm trying to grow out, so I just don't have too much more space for collecting more fry and eggs. So, yeah.
So you're not doing a lot of supplemental lighting?
No, not in the greenhouse, no. Yeah. And fish do still spawn in the wintertime. It's just like a pistos in the summer will spawn about every 2 weeks. In the wintertime, maybe it's once a month, which is all right. I mean, they can lay a lot of eggs at a time, so that's totally fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a fish you absolutely would not ever want to breed? Like I didn't know, like they're just too difficult.
No, that's part of the appeal for me is how difficult they are. So.
Because I know like the blue tang is very hard to like breed in captivity.
Yeah.
Wild caught.
Right. I mean, marine fish, I don't know if I'll ever go back to breeding marine fish. It's fun to do, but breeding something like the blue tang, you need a very large facility, and that's just not something I'm ever going to have. But in terms of fish, I would never want to breed. I don't do any of the like, and I wouldn't even call it enhanced, changed fish like balloon belly fish. I don't do. So those are ones I'll never breed, just because I don't like them. So, but what's that?
Do you do like any like koi you think in the future?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, I just don't have the space for breeding koi. I do love koi. They're fantastic fish, neat fish, but I can't ever see myself even having the space for that. Although obviously that pond outside could work for something like that, but that's not really that seems like more of a headache to me than something I want to get into. And koi breeding is so messy and time consuming and labor intensive and space consuming. But I do love koi. Someday I'd love to have a koi pond of my own, but definitely all males in the tank or all females. So I'm not actually having them breed. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about the plants, like in certain tanks you're using. If you use the Nubius and some water tang.
Right.
I don't know if you could comment a little bit more about that. Like, do you think much about like how densely planted the tanks are, or anything else about the plants that kind of comes up?
For most of my breeder tanks, I use a minimal amount of plants just because it adds just more stuff into the tank that makes it hard for me to see what's going on. It depends on the fish. like breeding these scatter spawning fish, I want as much Java moss as possible in the tank. Then you have better success. With most of the apistos, if I do use plants, like I said, it's slow growing rhizome plants. And the other issue with the greenhouse is growing plants in tanks is somewhat hard because you're battling algae the whole time because you're getting so much sunlight, especially in the summertime. So that's why I don't put as many plants as I could in some of the tanks, just because 50-50 they end up being full of algae. If I leave the curtain open too long accidentally or something, just for a couple of days, then you can have a massive algae bloom.
How do you take care of those? Are you just taking like a brush and just cleaning all these tanks constantly, or are you actually putting any chemicals in these?
I'm not using any chemicals. No, I go through every tank gets a water change at least once a week. So I go through and scrub, do hand siphoning since there's nothing that's recirculating. Everything is plumbed for auto refill, so I don't have to like take one hose and go from each tank. They all refill very quickly. The time-consuming thing is scraping the algae and cleaning the glass. The other issue with growing plants for me in the greenhouse is to mitigate the algae growth, I put styrofoam on the tops of lots of the tanks to cut down the light and also to retain heat in the wintertime. I'll take some of those off in the summertime just because the tanks will heat up too much if you leave styrofoam on top of them, then you really get the heat to build up. But it is harder for me to grow anything that needs a lot of light in the greenhouse without making a tank that's specific just for growing plants, which I do some of that as well. The other thing I can say to that is growing plants emergent works really, really well in the greenhouse. I do a lot of wabikuzas. I have a whole bench full of wabikuzas that we grow, and they grow fantastic. I actually have them on a little automatic misting unit with a light, and they grow really, really well, really, really fast. I didn't even think to take a picture of that. I was thinking about the fish, but I do. My dad attended actually one of the wabikuza workshops that Balin did, and he really loves doing them. So he does those for me, and I sell them in my shop, and people seem to enjoy them. So some people have them. I've heard people having them for multiple years, so it's fantastic. Really neat thing. So yeah.
Do you have a personal tank?
I do not. No, I had one for a while, and I actually had so I have probably about 400, 500 tanks total between the two buildings. So I had an aquarium. I had a 55 that I found on the side of the road at home for a while. As you do find 55 gallons on the side of the road pretty often. It seemed brand new, so I'm like, I can't pass this up. But I had rainbow shiners in it, which I loved. But no matter how much I love rainbow shiners, the last thing I wanted to do was do another water change. So I decided to get rid of that and move all the rainbow shiners back to my greenhouse. I have two cats at home, so that's plenty. And my new cat would definitely get into an aquarium, so I can't even do that. So yeah.
So I'm looking at this golden pearl.
Yeah.
For breeding larvae.
Yeah.
So what is the fry that will eat it? Like, what's the general rule?
I've had really good luck feeding like small scatter spawning fish fry. Well, they will eat it pretty early on, within a day or two. I've had great luck with them eating it. So, and it needs to be the smallest micron that they have. Yeah.
The golden pearl was produced for like large scale
Aquaculture.
Like aquaculture.
Yeah.
So it goes from the very finest you described all the way up to really coarse part of it.
Yep.
Well, you can buy it by grade.
Yep. And I buy the larger sizes for larger fish growing up. And it's a really great food, high quality food. Like you said, was made for aquaculture, large aquaculture. Not something on the small scale like what I have. So, yeah.
Have you ever tried breeding like coolie loaches at all?
I haven't tried coolie loaches. The one I'd like to try is the panda loaches. I don't know if anybody's really raised those. I don't know if it can be done in captivity, but I would like to try those. I brought them in once, and my intention was to keep a few, and they sold so quickly that I was kicking myself. I mean, it's hard not to, if somebody wants them, it's hard not to sell them. But those are some of the coolest fish I think I've ever kept. To have a tank full of like 50 of them when they're this big and they still have that bright white with the bright black coloration, they're cool fish and they're so active. The closest thing that you can get is the Pandagara, which aren't as vibrant but have a lot of the same behavior. and they're really easy fish to keep. I mean, they're not challenging, and they're good algae eaters too. Yeah, Balin?
Have you ever bred, or are you currently breeding any of the nano African cichlids?
Like the nanochromis? I I haven't done a lot with the shell dwellers. I've bred a couple, just like the multifasciatus and the ocellatus. Right now I'm just so geared towards the South American, the dwarf cichlids and the West Africans. I just don't have the time to mess with those, but I would like to do those too, because they're great small tank fish. Super fascinating behavior too. But if I do a African cichlid breeding, it's usually the West Africans, which have the same water demands as most of the South American dwarf cichlids too. So, yeah.
10 slides back, you had a plant, no leaves, it was just a stem. I have a feeling it was a really small plant. Maybe a nightella of some type, is that?
Looking.
Go about 10 slides back. That one.
That was just algae. Yeah. Yeah, it was just hair algae.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Yep. The eggs were actually stuck on a little hair algae on the mop, so it made it really easy to pull out. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it does look cool, and the algae worked well for getting the picture of the eggs. Otherwise they just wouldn't stand out in the photo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, one other question, kind of, I don't know if you can kind of talk about like your weekly or daily schedule. Sounds like you got a lot of things to try to keep track of. Like, I mean, it sounds like some things are really time sensitive, all this breeding and moving eggs and moving fish.
Yeah.
Like, how do you structure your week? I'm just kind of curious.
There's definitely a lot to do. So Monday through Wednesday, my shop isn't open. That's when I'm shipping. So Monday through Wednesday is when I send out shipments. So generally, the first thing I would do in the morning is feed the fish one time. Then I start working on shipments, and that's what I do until usually 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I have a regular FedEx pickup that comes at 1 o'clock. Sometimes later. It's tough because the pickup is 1 to 5. So I wish that it was just, if I knew it was 5, then I could wait later in the day to pack up the fish. But I have to have them done by 1, and sometimes I'm running a little behind. And luckily, the FedEx drivers know me so well that they'll give me a little extra time usually. But and they know they always come last, so they give me as much time as they can, and I appreciate that. But at that point, I go through and then feed the fish again, and do water changes. So usually I do water changes in the afternoon once I'm done feeding fish. And I'm lucky that my dad helps me out. He does some water changes for me too. And I have actually my old high school baseball coach retired, and he likes doing water changes. So he comes out Monday and Tuesday and helps do water changes, which is fantastic. And he loves doing it. He's actually the one that collects rainbow fish eggs, and I've had to kind of tell him to slow down on that because we have so many of them. But he loves coming through and picking out rainbow fish eggs, which is great. So I do a little bit of the collecting rainbow fish eggs, but he does that, and he loves doing it. So it's helping keep him busy in retirement. I think his wife said he needed to find something to do. If I had a guess on what happened, but that's great. I have a little bit of help, but I still do a lot of water changes on my own. So if I'm doing water changes Monday through Wednesday, I'm doing them after like 2 o'clock. So after I eat lunch. And then usually I feed at least the baby fish one more time in the evening before I leave. And then obviously mixed in there is sending emails, doing other, book work that I might have to do every day. So there's a lot to do. And then Thursday mornings, I do water changes on the store. So I can do the whole store in about 3 hours. So I get that all done before the store opens. And then I run the store Thursday through Sunday. And it depends on how busy I am. If I'm not super busy, I'll go in the greenhouse and do a few more water changes that may need to be done. But usually I hope by Friday that all the greenhouse water changes are done. And all I have to worry about is managing the store and feeding the fish. And then collecting eggs and fry the rainbow fish eggs are collected early in the week when my friend's there collecting rainbow fish eggs. But pistos and that sort of thing is kind of as needed. When I see that they need to be collected, I go in and collect them. So hopefully that is, if there's any more, detail.
Yeah, I was just thinking like, okay, so it's like the night before, these were spawning, so the next day I gotta go check that tank, see if I need to do anything, and then you're kind of like keeping really close eye on certain tanks. Is that how you're kind of like,
Yep.
back of your mind, you always got a few tanks like that you're thinking about?
Yep. And there's a lot of instances where I'll leave in the evening and a fish that is an evening spawner, I'll notice that they're acting. You can tell when certain fish are about getting ready to spawn, certainly. A lot of cichlids, you can tell. So I'll go back after dark and collect the eggs, especially if it's something I really want to make sure I get. And I'll collect the eggs then. Otherwise, if there's like a fish that's a morning spawner, I know it's the day before they're acting that way. I'll know first thing in the morning I'm going to be checking them and collecting the eggs if they have them. So.
A lot of tanks to keep it.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot to try to keep in mind, and sometimes I just miss some, and it just happens. And sometimes I get nice surprises where I didn't know something spawned, and I see a female pista with a bunch of fry, that's always a good surprise too. So.
Where does your wastewater go?
It's a French drain, so it drains away. Yeah.
It's onto the ground, not.
Not in the pond. No. Yeah.
You take days off or go on vacation?
No. Today's the first day I haven't been in my shop for because I don't think I'll probably be going there at all today since I don't know, sometime last year. So I mean, there are days I don't have to do as much. I can get the minimum. Like on a holiday, I still go and feed the fish, but that's about all I'll do. I'll go home. But there's only a few days out of the year that are like that. It is hard for me to get away for very long. And I don't like being away because things inevitably go wrong. And then there's just more work to do when you get back. So.
What about like selling at like the swap or like the Aquashella as like a weekend event?
The swaps, I'm lucky I can get my dad to watch the store for me. But it's getting to be where I'm too busy on the weekends to go to the swaps. So I'm not doing those so much anymore just because I'm busy. And it's hard to manage when there's a lot of people coming in there. So I prefer to be there. So that's why I'm not really doing the swaps so much anymore. And it's more stress than it's worth for me, at least at this point. So, yeah. Yep.
Do you have any plans of using the pond next to your greenhouse for projects?
I don't think so. No. It's a big pond. And there's a lot of fish in the pond. So I don't know how you go about even getting those fish out of there. What I have had great luck with is setting up 100-gallon tubs outside in the summertime. Breeding fish, I've had great luck with rainbow fish. I'm going to try a bunch of different fish out there this year. Try some dwarf pencil fish, some dwarf rainbow fish, and some other things as well. So, yeah. Any other questions?
The pond could be your new Carp City.
Yeah. It's I've definitely thought about it, but I don't want to deal with that. I don't know how I would manage that, and it is very deep in certain the way that pond, it's a man-made pond, and the two ends of the pond are at deepest, I think 15-20 feet deep. So it wouldn't work well for when you'd have to get the fish back out of it. It'd be almost impossible. And they just go into those deep spots, and it would be almost impossible to do. Yeah. And I like it for what it is. There's some huge largemouth bass in there because they're not really fished much. Huge bluegill, huge sunfish. So I'm fine with what it is. So I don't fish all that much. Usually by the end of the day, I've had enough to fish. And
Trevor, breeding crocodile. I know you said you like them when they're more challenging in general, but
no.
Do you know the number of species that you breed right now?
I don't have that number. No. I've never actually written it down and thought about it. I mean, for all the fish that I have raised, it's probably in the couple hundred different species, 300. I don't know. I mean, before I started the business, I bred a lot of fish too. So that's when I did necrosis, was before I even had the business. So, yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Have you tried to like grow your botanicals?
I haven't. I thought about doing that. Unfortunately, my space is just really limited. At this point, it's about every square foot is utilized. So I'd have to get rid of something if I wanted to do that. I have thought about it, and it would be really nice to be able to do that too. Yeah. I have to build an addition onto the greenhouse to do that, I suppose. But it would be really nice to have that. I certainly have the right setup for it. It's just having the space. So, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
We got you a large. Our shirts tend to a little bit on.
Okay.
Sides.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.